Hi, and thank you for joining me today. I just want to welcome you to this webinar where I'll be talking about the lessons learned in 2016 that are applicable to managing Microsoft in 2017. I want to tell you a little bit about Method 180 before we get too far. So Method 180, we're a consulting organization, and we're primarily made up of former Microsoft licensing executives, licensing specialists, account managers, people from various roles within Microsoft. What we do is we help organizations negotiate and understand Microsoft better to help reduce their costs. What we really offer is kind of 3 or 4 core services. We offer consulting services in which we help folks in when they're renegotiating Microsoft contracts or they're processing a true-up, again, with an eye to reducing costs. We also help organizations who find themselves in the midst of a Microsoft SAM engagement or a hard audit and need help in order to make sense of the data and understand how they can drive those costs down so they're not caught unawares. We also offer a range of training services around Microsoft licensing, as well as we have some tools to help you easily and quickly generate Microsoft licensing statements. So what I want to talk to you today really is around what I've learned from Microsoft and some things I want you to remember today. This is complicated, and it's designed to be thus. And I'd like to ask people, you only get the opportunity to do this every few years. We have the opportunity to deal with many, many contracts on a day-to-day basis, day in, day out. We're dealing with this. Unfortunately, even the best procurement team only really gets an opportunity to do this once every 3 years, maybe a true-up in an annual event. Meanwhile, Microsoft licensing landscape is constantly changing. And the rules of engagement, what they're offering in terms of concessions, change just based on their requirements. As I've got up on the screen right now, what we're seeing right now is they're only really willing to do a deal and kind of negotiate a lot if it includes cloud. I want to talk to you folks a bit about transitions and bundles today. I want to keep this in your head. I mean, this is an old tactic Microsoft utilizes to basically get you to buy more. At Microsoft, we were masters at this, really, in terms of creating bundles. Going way, way back to the first, things like even something as simple as Microsoft Office. When we first kind of used to be, it was Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and maybe Access. In the past, you would buy these products separately. We bundled them together, and you wound up paying a little bit less than you would have for all 3 or 4 of those products, depending on which version you bought. But at the end of the day, you wound up paying more if you were just someone who used Word, for instance. Now, Microsoft really is expert at selling programs, not licensing. And the core product they're always trying to sell is some form or shape of the enterprise agreement. And I know there's various iterations, be they cloud, be there more things that are more traditional licensing, or maybe they're just things that are just server-based. But what they're really looking for, when I say enterprise agreement, what I'm speaking about is really when they're kind of tallying up your whole environment and putting a standard suite of products or products across that whole desktop, that whole estate. But there's often better deals to be had, which is really a matter of really understanding what you really need and just buying what you need and not falling victim into these things where it looks like a better deal, but it's really not. I'm going to go into more detail on that. Microsoft is auditing. Back in the day, we didn't really audit very much. In fact, we created this whole concept internally of the Microsoft SAM engagement. This was initially a way to be kind of touchy-feely about this, so that we didn't want to hurt your feelings. We didn't want to really be seen as hard and fast auditors, and we wanted to kind of disguise it. The gloves are really off in this, and it's really changed. I mean, one tip I'll give you is back in the day when we used to do enterprise agreement, everybody had round numbers. How many desktops do you have? And folks would say 3,500, and we would go at Microsoft 3,500. Nobody really has 3,500 desktops or 40,000 desktops. You have 3,500, 3,501 numbers like that. Microsoft is verifying this now, and that's where they're going through these audits. So whether it's an audit or whether it's just them knocking the door, offering to, air quotes here, help you out in terms of a software asset management engagement where they're going to share knowledge. These are really audits, by the way, but they're going to be a certainty. You're going to see these happen on, I would say, on an every 3-year basis is what you're seeing. And the other piece I'll get is understanding your own estate. Many customers, when we get involved with them, think they understand what licenses are actually deployed and what they're actually entitled to. But it's kind of surprising how many folks, once we kind of really drill into it, are kind of surprised at what's actually been deployed or what licenses they have or don't have. So having that key understanding and being aware of that is something I would really recommend. In fact, kind of a shameless plug here. We offer a service where we do kind of self-assessments, where we kind of go in and we take an approach. We work obviously for you, but we operate basically like an auditor. We come in and provide you with a licensing position to help you understand, what potential gaps or shortfalls may exist in your licensing and in terms of your deployments, and help you remediate those and come up with the best possible way around it. So I presented this deck at a variety of conferences, and what the feedback I've got, these are kind of the top challenges that our customers face. And please forgive me for sort of reading off the screen on this one, but I think it's important to kind of go through these. We're shifting from perpetual licensing to the cloud. And although we're moving to cloud, and theoretically that should be easier to manage, we're in a transition period where we have both traditional on-prem licenses and cloud ones. No one's really moving completely to one place. It's more difficult to manage. We're being, and then on top of that, compounding that is we're really at loggerheads with Microsoft on a very fundamental basis, being that we, as yourselves, as business leaders, people who are making these decisions internally, are trying to control costs, reduce costs. Microsoft and their account teams and everyone else, they want to increase the cost for licensing. And this is why you're seeing some of these changes, the way they tweak the rules for licensing, procs to cores, things like that, to drive the costs up and have you frankly pay more for the same estate. You really only want to purchase what you need. But Microsoft, we talked about bundling. They continue to bundle and discount these bundles to try to make it more appealing, to get you to buy more products than you need and kind of hook you on a support cycle moving forward where it's going to wind up costing you more. And also, audits are coming from everywhere, and they're coming from all sorts of different vendors. Other vendors are seeing what Microsoft is doing in terms of gaining revenue from these audits without actually doing a tremendous amount of work, and they're jumping on this bandwagon too. So having a very solid asset management framework inside your organization is going to be critical. So what I'm also seeing is, these traditional software models, it really is in flux, and it's changing real quick, and it's evolving in terms of the cloud, not necessarily for the good of the customer. When we first talked about cloud some years ago, everyone thought they were going to save money. You're really not saving money. Your costs haven't gone down. In fact, they've gone up. On top of that, the sales tactics really haven't changed. Microsoft, and they're not alone in this, but they're not really selling value to you in terms of the licenses and how they actually work. What they're selling and positioning is they're selling a licensing program, be it an enterprise agreement of some form, but it's really a bundle of products, and they're really selling programs, and they're very, very, very good at this. Quite frankly, this is really their bread and butter. It's what they're exceptional at. And, I'll say the other thing is for audits, they're just not done correctly. And they become really, real big time sucks. On top of that, they cost a lot if you're found out of compliance, but they can suck up a ton of time as you're gathering data, reputing things, going back and forth. And often, almost in all our experience, the starting place for these audits is incorrect, and it's wildly overestimated from the auditor. Folks in general don't understand their Microsoft contracts, and I don't mean to make fun of anyone, because these are complicated stacks of documents. But all of your rights, everything you have is laid out in those contracts and supporting documents like Microsoft PER, product use rights, or product terms. And almost all of these documents are available online with a quick Google or Bing, if you like, search. But often we just take what our rep tells us as fact, when all the answers and your rights are laid right out there. So I think one thing I would really recommend to everybody here is to take a look through your contracts, educate yourselves about the ins and outs of these and the vague terms. You might be surprised at what you actually have the ability to say no to, because many of us, we accept what Microsoft tells us just because, well, they must know better than us. Well, quite frankly, that account team, they didn't write those contracts. They don't know. You may have an amendment somewhere that you've negotiated, or maybe your predecessor negotiated, that really restricts what they're saying. So it's good to know that and understand your stack. So what we've done is we've kind of compiled a top 10 list, kind of like David Letterman, in terms of the top 10 things that we're seeing in the marketplace and behaviors from Microsoft to be aware of. So I kind of talked about this already, but you need to know your contract language. These are terms like Microsoft almost has their own language. It's almost like a foreign language, which things like change of reseller, understanding true up, understanding your rights, when you need to do a true up, when maybe you have more time than you realize, and quite frankly, understanding how to count. And I say that because the metrics change. What used to be a product that was licensed on a per user basis maybe now licensed on a per device basis. What was once cores or CPUs is now cores. And it's really important to understand and make sure you're counting the current weight based on what you've deployed and what you have the rights for. And I know I've kind of harped on this already, but read the fine print in your contract. You might be surprised, things you have the ability either to say no to, or maybe you have more time. If your account team's saying they need to have certain exercises like a true up done by a date, check your contract, see what it says. Depending on the iteration of your contract, you may have more flexibility than your account team is letting on. Okay, we're going to talk about audits here. Number 9, they're about contract language and product terms. So I think we all can acknowledge that audits are really hard work and they're just getting harder. But it's also a negotiation, and this is absolutely critical to understand. A lot of people think it's basically a forensic audit, and it's not. Really, Microsoft puts these out and works with partners in many cases. These partners can be boutique shops who specialize in software asset management, or they could be large accounting firms that have this specialization. But in each case, when they bring a partner in to do this sort of work, that partner is beholden to Microsoft, not to yourself. And they're really incentivized to drive a gap. That's the reason Microsoft has them there. So it's really important that you understand that. And one of the things we recommend in all cases is getting a non-disclosure agreement in place. And by this, what I mean is between yourself and that third-party auditor. And what that non-disclosure agreement, we're certainly not lawyers, but something along the lines of what it would do is prevent them from releasing the data, the audit findings to Microsoft until you have had an opportunity to approve the data. And why this is important is typically an auditor will go in initially, they'll run their scripts, they'll take your data, they'll compile it against the licenses they have, and there will be a wildly overstated number, which everybody else will know is wrong. They'll have dev and test included in that, other things. But if the Microsoft account team has full visibility into that from day one, odds are they will either forecast it or will get forecasted for them. Once that happens, it becomes very, very hard to move them off the number and get them back. So it's a lot easier to work with these auditors, get that data as clean as possible, and only once you're comfortable with it, you've got all those obvious red flags, then sign off and allow it to be pushed forward onto the Microsoft account team. But obviously, one of the best things you can do is actually understand your own data before an audit happens and really know it, because otherwise you're going to be surprised. They're going to flag some things. They're going to ask you why you're doing things, and you want to have good answers ready. And I'm not saying that you want to, say falsehoods, because that's not the case. But if something is a dev and test, you have a clearly marked reason for having it, let's call it out. If you're running a parallel environment because our project is going to get folded down, let's make sure we understand what that is, note it accordingly, and have our stories ready so we're not surprised by the data when it comes. So Microsoft has been pushing Office 365 for some years now. In fact, what we're seeing right now is really the only product that Microsoft is really willing to do substantial discounting on, do deals on, includes cloud products. And what they're really trying to do is get you to purchase for your entire environment, one of their hero SKUs like an E4 and E5, before you're ready to make that switch. And so what we strongly recommend on this is to take it carefully. There's no rush, because you really don't pay until you deploy. And, really, Microsoft tries to create a sense of urgency, and it's a bit of a false sense, by offering deals to get you to move ahead of time, because they want everyone onto these subscription licenses. Whereas really, I really encourage people to take a look at the products. And there's some SKUs out there in terms of some charts that kind of show what products are included with which one. Have a look at what you need. If you really just need Exchange Online effectively, or a few pieces, maybe it makes sense to buy those a la carte instead of a bundle. And make sure you understand what your realistic deployment number is, time frame is, and then I'd recommend actually doubling that to make sure you do your technical checks, make sure it works, from both a technical standpoint, from a human perspective, make sure people are willing to accept it, and what would be a realistic time frame to actually roll that out. But bake all of that in, have a good understanding of what that is. Otherwise, you're going to be paying for product that you're not using. To this end, I'm just putting this chart up for a bit, and this is our Office 365 decision model. And I think this is kind of a great chart that one of my colleagues, Mike Austin, put together. And the reason I like it so much is it kind of lays out, it's common knowledge and common sense, but on the other hand, it kind of lays it out in a very clear manner for folks. And really what we're looking at is there's kind of three core things. We've got our business requirements that we've identified them. We've got costs in terms of the EA renewal. And then we've got our deployment plan and roadmap developed. Well, Where these circles overlap is where we want to take a look at and understand what makes sense. So if we're in that area, where there's the one there, we've got a lack of TCO, but there's no financial justification to really move forward. Number two, we really, no time frames are developed. Number three, there's really no business case. We lack so much of the business requirements. The only window where we really can move forward on is that little sliver in number four, where we have an alignment of all of these three pieces to move forward and actually make sense. But I really encourage folks to take a look carefully at this and understand all of these pieces and make sure they make sense, not just on, if you only have part of the puzzle, it's really hard to make an ROI justification. As you move to the cloud, I think it's important to understand, we're looking at user-based windows, and it's important to understand how cloud mobility works, because we're not really, most organizations, in fact, I see very few who are moving 100% to a cloud-based infrastructure. It's going to be a mix, kind of a hybrid environment, which adds a layer of complexity to everything. And it's really important to understand this, because you're going to have users who are using traditional, non-cloud licenses mixing with ones who are using cloud-based. There may be a little bit of both. I mean, it can be a bit of a mess. And also, if you're using a third-party data provider, we found through our analysis, sometimes instead of bringing your own licenses, it's actually cheaper, even for large companies in some cases, to use the licenses that they can provide for you, because they have a different licensing model than you do. And you only get to do this once, because once you make that transition, you transition your whole environment to the cloud, they've really got you, because you're on a subscription model. It's not a perpetual license, and you're going to see, frankly, the willingness to discount, the willingness to negotiate is going to change. So the way you really want to drive costs out is by negotiating terms. And some of you may know this, some of you may not, but I mean, with most software vendors, you really work and grind on discount. For instance, if you're dealing with Oracle, you can get a very aggressive discount out of the gate once you've got your configuration, and you're pretty much good to go. With Microsoft, you're never going to see that level of discounting. I mean, it's just simply not the way they're wired. I mean, to tell a little bit of a story, I mean, Microsoft is one of probably the most tightly regulated organizations on earth since the DOJ hearings. And to that end, I mean, your account rep typically has 0% discount they can provide you. The licensing specialist who kind of walks in with around renewal time to talk to you, they've probably got about 5%. And you go up to the manager, they've got maybe 5. You go up to a regional manager or director, maybe 10 points. But we're not talking huge numbers here. So how do you get the costs out? You do it by defining terms based on your use scenarios and not Microsoft. Doing things like user profiling exercises where in the case of a manufacturing facility, maybe you have a subset of your employees who Microsoft would call knowledge workers, or kind of white collar folks who work at a traditional desk. They have a laptop, maybe they have a phone as well that they're authenticating on, and they're using a lot of the Microsoft suite of products. Maybe that organization also has another set of kind of manufacturing employees who really work on the shop floor. They maybe access their email via kiosk, or maybe they just get an email account, and that is the extent of their access, and they're accessing that predominantly maybe through a smartphone, and maybe it's almost exclusively just to get their pay stub or something like that. That's a very different user profile. And it's also a function of kind of, just knowing your workforce. But that's one piece of it. But on top of that is things like understanding, putting those clauses in that make sense for you and understanding your business and avoiding the double paying. And by this, what I mean is in many cases, you'll see Microsoft put together some scenarios where you're inadvertently, unbeknownst to yourself, double paying. You may own for a user, they may be covered both under MSDN, also under another license, traditional license. And sometimes you also see things where you see cloud-based licensing and traditional non-cloud-based licensing covering for the same product for the same employee, and you're effectively doubling up. So we are starting to see Microsoft making these changes in terms of how they're changing licenses. We saw in the past SQL Server move from CPUs to core-based licensing, and we're seeing the same switch now on Windows Server. And so the reason they're doing this is really to drive additional revenue. I mean, I remember some years ago, we had a customer who was involved, caught in the middle of that SQL Server transition. This individual had the opportunity to go to Redmond to actually sit on a briefing. And this transition was going to cost that particular organization, over seven figures in terms of the transition costs. And they asked, somebody on the Microsoft product team what the rationale for it was. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something akin to, I'm making something up here to be very clear, but it was something along the lines of, we have, a large percentage of the database marketplace, but comparatively speaking, we only have a small amount of the revenue compared to our competitors. So obviously, in Microsoft's mind, they had underpriced the product in the marketplace. So they were just correcting the pricing to make it make more sense. However, the customer was one making that up. And I'll also mention this we talk about here about free license grants. So this is where maybe you've negotiated something where they're granting you something in terms of maybe a handful of licenses for a variety of reasons. These license grants and transitions are typically not tracked in your Microsoft contract. They're typically not tracked in your Microsoft ELP. So you want to document the heck out of this. Somebody in your organization needs to document this, because otherwise it will be vapor, particularly if people in your organization leave, transition, and you lose that institutional knowledge. It's important to keep track of this. That way you've got it, because Microsoft won't remember it and they will not track it. So with auditors, we've talked a fair bit about audits already, but I think I've kind of mentioned to you, audits tend to be conservative. They tend to be overblown at the beginning. So what you want to do is be really, really careful in terms of, your auditors, because like I said, they're incentivized in most cases to drive a gap. That's really what their job is. An auditor will work, and I speak this from a software perspective, not a forensic accounting audit, but they work for the organizations paying them. They want to do, what they think is best, but they also want to drive a gap. And you want to be really careful with this, particularly with third-party auditors. But one of the rules of thumb we use is we call the 50-30-20 rule. And what this is, when you receive an initial estimated licensing position or an ELP from an auditor, third-party auditor, you'll typically see, you have your licensing, your deployments aligned, it'll show your gaps, things like that. Typically, 50% of whatever that gap is garbage, and you'll quickly be able to eliminate that, because it's no brainer. It's gonna be like, okay, you've got my dev and test environment in there, take that out. You're picking up some decommissioned stuff that shouldn't even be in there, take it out. 30% of it is kind of where that remaining 30, the next 30% is kind of, this is where it gets a little bit gray. This is where we come in, we're pulling out terms and conditions in terms of reputing what they're saying. And we're kind of going back and forth, and licensing documentation in some cases isn't particularly clear, and we're kind of throwing terms and conditions back at the auditor to kind of beat that down. And then the final 20%, once we get there, that final 20%, that's probably reasonably accurate. We can probably go from there further, negotiate further, but that's probably close to reality. So when you first get one of these, and you get a gap that, is enough to make you fall off your chair, that's the reason. Remember, at least 50% of it is garbage right out of the gate in most cases. So I think that there's an old saying, follow the money, and we're going to do that at Microsoft here. So understanding how your rep gets paid. So obviously, Microsoft reps get paid based on selling product. I think that goes without saying. They also are now paid based on deploying the product. So it's not enough that you just buy the product. They need to get it deployed. But then they also have another piece which kind of ties into this, which is scorecards. So I'm sure most folks are aware of scorecards, but Microsoft is a profoundly scorecard-driven organization. And I mean, this is around deployment numbers. It's around products that don't cost anything. I'll give you an example. When I was there, we actually had to do a presentation to all of our customers on Internet Explorer. Now, Internet Explorer, as most of you are, I'm sure all of you are aware, is free. But we had to go into every one of our enterprise customers and do a presentation on our scorecard on why the new one was the best, that we could make sure we kept, other competitive browsers out. But if they don't do these things, they can get themselves in harm's way, particularly if they're not meeting their number. And I mean, from a scorecarding perspective, it gets ridiculous. I mean, if you're one of those folks who your rep you get selected to do a customer survey on your rep, the reason you've been selected is your rep actually believes that you'll give them a good survey back. Because if you give them a bad result back, they'll actually get called in the carpet and they'll be told they have to fix this customer sat issue. Microsoft actually takes that very, very seriously. Now, this is something you can work with and understand. So, I mean, unless you really dislike your rep, I wouldn't suggest you just hammer them on this, but it's certainly something you can have a discussion with them about. But furthermore, when you start to see kind of illogical behavior in a negotiation where they're, from a product perspective, they're continuing to pound a square peg into a round hole. For instance, you've told them Azure doesn't make sense from a regulatory requirement. We simply can't do it. But yet they continue to hammer it in. They probably have a scorecard requirement that says, regardless of whether you can use it or not, they have to have a certain amount on that contract. It's things like that, but it creates occasionally, I'll call it illogical behavior. And they're not all incented the same. So you've got your account team, then you've got the licensing group, and you've got audit teams. So all these teams have slightly different metrics and scorecards that they quantify as success. I mean, one of the things from a negotiation perspective is if you're getting a, stonewalled on something you're trying to get and it's a reasonable request and the account team's saying no, obviously it's something that they don't want to do, but maybe, if you go up the chain, maybe someone else who can take from maybe a management or a director level can take a longer view of the process as opposed to just that account. Maybe that's something that's more palatable to them or wouldn't negatively impact their scorecard. So it's something important to know. Now, this next one, this is one of the things we say over and over and over again around our office, which is knowing what you don't need is more important than knowing what you do need. And by this, what we mean is these bundles, they cost you extra money and we keep falling for it. And frankly, the horrible thing is because we keep falling for it, other vendors are doing the same thing. And, I'm going to take you back a bit here, but I mean, at Microsoft, we were and probably remain very, very good at selling enterprise agreements. I mean, our renewal rates when I was there were, in the mid to high 70s to low 80s. So we typically, when we got a renewal from you, we typically were able to get an additional 25% out of you in order to meet our quotas. And frankly, the way we did this was by rejigging the licensing model, adding a bit more. Like, here's a famous example. Hey, we just created eCal. You had CoreCal. Now you need eCal because we've got these great new products. But here's the good news. Because you do this, we're going to be able to displace these other products. We're going to replace your telephony, your phone system. So you won't pay for that, but we're not going to actually help you do it. But that'll help you cost justify buying our licenses. And these are the sorts of things they do. So it's really important to understand what you don't need. So when you start to go through this list, one of the things I tell folks is, they've got these wonderful charts up on their website in a variety of places for various products and bundles of what's included. Go through and, say, well, I only need these products. These ones I don't need. I'm not using. I have no plans to deploy. I have no plans to utilize. Please come back with me for what I need. And you may have to ask for this several times. And the reason I say you may have to ask for it several times is they won't want to do it. They'll keep coming back to the bundle. And you know what? Maybe if they come back enough times and they get really, really aggressive, maybe it starts to make sense. But I would suggest you're better off just hammering on what you really, really do need and ask them why they can't understand that all you really need are, 3 of the 7 products, things like that. Because remember, you're going to be paying for support on those products moving forward. It's just not a one-time purchase. You're going to be continuing to do it. So don't be afraid to walk away. And, on these subscription models, instead of buying the big all you can eat in terms of covering your entire estate, you can just do pay as you go. Just purchase a subset of your environment on a cloud, trial it out, see if it makes sense. You can always grow it later. That's one of the beauties of cloud. And the last, number 1, is hire experts. As we've kind of discussed today, this is ridiculously complicated. And you can only look after so many folks. And you only get the opportunity to deal with Microsoft. I mean, although it may feel sometimes like you're spending an inordinate amount of your time on them so often, and you're only actually seeing through your prism, we're getting the opportunity to see them, 60, 70, 80 times, different engagements per year, how different teams are going. We can see the behavior and the trends that are occurring in the marketplace. And we have a great deal of success in terms of driving costs out for folks. I want to just stress one thing. When folks engage us, our goal is not to burn your relationship with Microsoft. Microsoft, for most of you, is a strategic vendor today when you begin a negotiation, and they're going to be a strategic relationship to you afterwards. And even if it's an audit, they'll still be strategic to you afterwards. That's just the nature of it. It's not our job to destroy that relationship unless, of course, you instruct us to do so, which has actually never happened. But the point being, we work for you. Most of the work that we do is through terms and conditions, and we speak their language. So we're giving them back, arguments, and when I say arguments, building a business case on your behalf for the licensing model that you need in language that they understand, in ways that they understand it. So I'd really encourage you to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have a free consultation and see if we can help. I've just got my name and my contact information up on the screen now. If you wish to reach out to me, by all means, please reach out. I'll be happy to have a further conversation. And depending on the nature, we may bring in one of our additional resources to see if we can help you and see if there's a way we can help you today. But I just want to say thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.